Don't you hate it when that happens to you? When it does, you need this and this and this. When it happens to me, I always know where to go. When you've got professionals on your side, your problems don't stand a chance. What are you waiting for? Contact them today and let them take care of your problems.
Hello everyone, my name is Herdy Eastman of Extreme Wizards Digitizing in Montreal. Not only are we digitizers, but through our partnership with Embroidery Systems Canada out of Calgary, we offer sales and technical support for Melco embroidery machines in Canada. Today, I want to talk to you about how to create and embroider nice and crisp small lettering. This is a topic that as a digitizer I encounter every single day. Therefore, I think this video will be helpful to you and us here at work, since our clients will be better informed as to the process involved for creating nice small lettering. We will be covering keyboard lettering, digitize lettering, techniques to best attain good quality lettering, and understanding how the push and pull of the embroidery process will affect the outcome of your embroidery projects. Let's get at it. Very often, the size of the lettering will dictate the size of the logo. For example, one of the questions that I most often get as a digitizer is, how small can you make this logo? My answer is, that depends on how much latitude I have in playing with the size of the letters and the type of font used in the logo. In fact, sometimes I wonder if just because we have the words wizard in our company name, people believe that Mario and myself can perform magic. I do have to say that as good as we are, we still find ourselves limited by the laws of physics. Typically, a block type font can go down to as small as 4 millimeters, depending on the type of material that you're embroidering on. In contrast, a serif type font is less forgiving, and the minimum height is about 7 millimeters. Keep in mind that these are all generalizations and that they will vary depending on the different situations, but it does give you a good point of reference to start with. Another thing to keep in mind when embroidering small lettering is the size of the weave in the garment you're embroidering on. In other words, the bigger the weave in the garment, the less forgiving it is to small lettering. For example, the minimum letter height tends to be higher on apparel such as toques or wool knits than it otherwise would be on, say, cotton shirts or twill. In fact, when we're digitizing small lettering for toques, we often lay down a light fill, or as we refer to it, a netting, in the same color as the toque. The purpose of which is that the light fill acts as a bridge inside the weave, providing a foundation of support for the stitches of the letters. Since the fill stitch is in the same color as the toque, the visual effect is that the material around and behind the letters looks to be a little bit flattened out, but otherwise invisible due to the nature of the tone-on-tone stitching. This technique can also be effective on fleece and terry cloth. If you really want to go the extra mile, you can use solvay in conjunction with the fill stitch netting. I prefer adding the solvay after the netting is embroidered and not before. Makes for an easier cleanup job. As a digitizer or as an embroiderer, the most important concept to understand is the concept of push and pull and how it affects your embroidery projects. I can't stress this enough. This is key. If you're able to grasp this concept properly, you'll most likely be able to troubleshoot most, if not all, of your embroidery registration problems. Like I mentioned earlier, embroidery is subject to the laws of physics. In this case, the concept of push and pull is similar to Newton's third law of motion, in that it states that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. In the case of embroidery, when you embroider a column, the action of the stitches on the material will be such that the column will be squeezed inwards along the column's width, and the reaction to the squeezing will be a stretching of the column along its height. Another thing to keep in mind when dealing with push and pull is that the more stretch the garment has, the greater the degree of push and pull. That movement of the material will typically be between 0.3 millimeters to about 0.6 millimeters, but will vary depending on the amount of stretch in the material. That seemingly small distortion will have a greater effect on small letters than the larger letters due to the simple fact that the movement represents a greater percentage of the overall height of the small letters. When I work with keyboard fonts that aren't specifically adjusted for small lettering, I will fine-tune those letters. What I do is once I have them up on screen, I will lay down a sort of horizontal grid background using a horizontal spacing of about 0.2 millimeters. The vertical spacing in this case is irrelevant. Using this grid, I will proceed to adjust the height of each individual letter, or as we call it, height compensate the letter. Once finished, on screen, the height of my letters will look uneven, but once embroidered, they will even out. My guidelines when adjusting the different elements of the letters are as follows. Vertical columns get no extra compensation. Horizontal columns get 0.2 millimeters of extra compensation. Circular columns get 0.4 millimeters of extra compensation. These are my values, but again, you can fine-tune these values as you see fit. Basically, what we are trying to accomplish is surgically boosting the pull comp you already have pre-selected for your entire project to specific parts of the small letters. This will help to ensure that they will look even and well defined when embroidered. I know some of you might wonder, why don't you just pump up the pre-selected pull comp values? That's a fair question. The answer is that if you add too much auto pull comp, it tends to distort your letters in unexpected ways. To put it bluntly, it's just messy. This is true with all digitizing softwares I've had the opportunity to work with. That being said, your overall pull comp generally should be set between 0.2 and 0.3 millimeters, and not much more than that. There are many of our clients that want all the connectors between the letters to be trimmed because they believe it looks cleaner. In reality, the opposite is true. Let me explain why. Every time you perform a trim, the following takes place. 1. You need to tie off your column with 2 or 3 stitches like a small knot so that the letters won't come undone. 2. The machine performs the trim. 3. Once trim, you will need to catch the bobbin thread with a tie-in stitch. Again, this takes another 2 or 3 stitches to start a new letter. All these tie-ins and tie-offs are knots, the size of which represents a significant percentage of the size of the small letter, and will generally appear as a messy little bump on the end of the letter. Another thing to keep in mind is that every embroidery machine does their best work once they are in their quote-unquote embroidery groove. In other words, when you have all these starts and stops in your logo, it will affect the quality of the stitches being laid down at those particular start and stop points. This is one of the reasons, as digitizers, we try to minimize the number of trims in a logo. If your software comes with keyboard fonts for small lettering, then it's going to make your life a little easier. When you put these fonts up on screen, you'll find that they are already high compensated. Thus, they will appear uneven on screen, but again, they will even out when you embroider them. When I digitize small letters, I like to prepare my artwork with my letters already high compensated, whenever possible, that is. I'm going to do a little demo using Melco Design Shop software to digitize a few letters with artwork that already has been high compensated. When setting the density for small letters, you want to use a density of about 0.45 millimeters. The rule of thumb as a digitizer is that the smaller the object, the less density you should use. I also wish to point out that the 0.45 millimeter density is just my preference that I find works best and which I use as a starting point. I might increase it on a rare occasion to 0.4 millimeters, but not much more than that. Keep in mind that more density does not mean better when embroidering small elements. Another important factor to consider when working with small letters is the type of underlay you will be using. Some of your columns are going to be very narrow. In fact, some will be as thin as 0.7 millimeters wide. For this reason, you will pretty much need to always be using a running stitch underlay with a tight stitch length of about 1.8 millimeters. If your stitch length is too long, then what's going to happen is that the underlay won't be able to follow tight curves in certain letters, resulting in the underlay poking out of the column. For that matter, you should also set the travel run stitch length to the same 1.8 millimeter value. For those wondering what a travel run stitch is, it's the stitch that the software uses to travel from one element of the letter to the next, and it should not be confused with a running stitch underlay. They're not the same. You should familiarize yourself with the difference between the two.
To our
Typically, most embroiderers use a general purpose size 7511 needle with the usual 40 weight embroidery thread. The 75 in the needle size refers to the thickness of the needle shaft. In this case, the needle shaft is 0.75 millimeters wide. If you're looking to optimize or fine-tune the quality of your small letters, you might want to downsize to a 7010 needle. And if you really want to pull out all the stops, then you can use a 65-9 needle. But keep in mind that if you want to use this size needle, you will also need to switch to the thinner 60 weight embroidery thread due to the small eye of the needle. If you try to use a 40 weight thread with this size needle, you will find yourself cursing at the constant amount of thread breaks. Remember, you want to minimize the amount of start and stops of your machine to optimize the quality of your embroidery. Choosing the right backing is also critical to the embroidery process. I frankly have a blanket statement for all my clients. Unless you're embroidering on caps, always use cutaway backing. Tearaway backing tears too easily and thus doesn't do an adequate job of binding the backing to the garment. Thus, it fails to offer the necessary support needed to ensure a stable platform to create crisp letters. In contrast, the cutaway backing will not tear under the pounding of the needle, merging the backing and the garment, creating the solid platform to help your machine embroider the well-defined letters you're looking for. To take things to the next level, in terms of stability, I recommend using adhesive spray in conjunction with the cutaway backing to firmly merge the two. This extra step is highly recommended when dealing with performance or dry fit material. Also, use the smallest possible hoop size to minimize play in the material. Also, always hoop the backing with your garment and not just stick the backing under the garment when it's on the machine. The state of your machine will obviously play a big part in the quality of the embroidery on your finished garments. You might have the best digitized logo in the world, but if your machine is not within spec, then your result will always fall short of your machine's true potential. Two of the most common things that are quick and easy to check for are the following. 1. Correct tensions on your belts or cables. If your tensions are too low, your machine will embroider your columns thinner than what they should be, thus affecting the definition on your lettering. Checking the tension on Melco machines is a very simple process. You just got to use your X cable tension gauge. First, remove the side cover on your machine. Once the cover removed, face the side of the machine and center the Y belt clamp between the two black indicator marks on the Y belt itself. Next, from the front of the machine, move the X carriage left or right until the two screws indicated are centered to the lower arm. Position the tension gauge on the X cable, making sure it is centered between the indicated pulley and the upper arm. A properly adjusted X cable will fall within the cutout area on the gauge. If the tension is too low, the X cable will be positioned above the cutout, in which case refer to the technical manual for the 15-minute procedure to adjust it. It's a very simple process. Next thing to check. Is your hoop secure and tight on your hoop arm assembly? If you feel there is some back and forth play in your clamps, then that will have a big effect on your small lettering. Again, this is a quick and easy fix on Melco machines. Simply loosen the two nuts securing the black pressure plate. With a hoop on the machine, push the plate forward until it tightly secures the hoop in place. Retighten the 2 nuts, and you're done. Repeat if necessary on the other side. Alright, well, I hope that this video has been helpful and at least partly demystifying how to embroider small letters. I would appreciate it if you can give us a thumbs up or hit that subscribe button to not miss out when we put out our next video. On behalf of all of us at Extreme Wizards Digitizing, thank you and stay safe. Cheers.